Welcome back. I'm Connie Sokol, your host, and we are so blessed today to have an incredible guest. If you're an author, a wannabe author, you feel like you got that book in you, but you just can't because you're too busy, life is crazy, well, we've got news for you. This woman has made it happen through really difficult challenges, and she's going to share with us how she has navigated her intersection of faith, creativity, and professional skill. Welcome, Tiffany Rosenhan, today.
Thank you, Connie. Happy to be here.
Such a joy. This woman has released a fantastic YA debut novel that has been received beautifully. Publishers Weekly. I mean, all the things I'm going to share with you in a little bit. Just these. Well, in fact, let's do it now. School Library Journal, an international high-stakes spy novel, book list, heart-pounding international action fuels this novel at an unrelenting pace. And Kirkus, Rosenhan's debut is absolutely crammed with action, international name dropping, and intrigue and sizzling, though PG scenes between Sophia and Axel. And we're going to get into that because I love so many people say, if you're going to write YA, you got to be edgy if you even want to compete in the market, right? So we're going to go talk about that because we are going to dispel that myth. But meanwhile, let me give you the official bio so you can get all the juicies behind her because she is fantastic. She is actually the granddaughter of Oscar-winning screen siren Mary Astor. If you remember that, the Maltese Falcon, the black and white show, so good. She is also, as we said, the debut author of the spy thriller Girl from Nowhere. And her spy skill, personally, is being in two places at once because of her twin. So beautiful. She also has a degree in political science from the University of Utah and loves to travel with her husband and children. Her husband is a critical care physician and stroke survivor, and we're going to talk about that in a minute as well. So we are so happy to have you here. Now, I want to go behind the bio. Let's go a little bit deeper. Let's go back to that moment. You had, married, had 4 daughters right out of the gate. Your husband's in medical school, which we all know that's crazy, but you're using your writing as an escape, as we all do as moms, like, going into this world that we have some control over. And then you are actually putting into play the ability to get your book launched. And then boom, he experiences this devastating stroke and has brain surgery and seizures and all of the things. Take us to that moment, just right out of the gate, where all of these dreams, all of this work, all of these things for 10 years, you've been writing this, and then boom, you're at this moment. What was that like?
Great question. There's a lot that goes on before then, so I think I'm going to start right where you asked about.
Let's do it.
The book publication. So I had written for years for fun for myself, just to entertain myself. I love telling stories. I've always been a storyteller. So I'd written this story, and I had always enjoyed that process, alone at night when my husband was in his training, medical residency and fellowship, and then moonlighting and all of that. And I just really cherished that time by myself when my kids were asleep and I was creating stories. And so I built this story, but I was very resistant to publishing. It was just not on my radar. I was not writing to publish. It was not my goal. It was never my goal.
Why is that? Why were you not thinking that?
Well, because writing for me was just something I did in the evenings as a hobby. It wasn't something I saw as a profession. It was just storytelling for me. This was
a release.
It was a release. It was so fun to just, my character, she's all over the world. So there's a lot of great research that goes into this. So it was just a really fun process. I thought I would eventually publish, but I was writing mostly for myself, to entertain myself, to keep myself mentally occupied. I can go back further and say, I graduated college, I was 20 years old. I had my degree in political science and history with an emphasis in international relations. And I thought I'd maybe go join the CIA or join the Foreign Service, but I was married, pregnant with my first daughter. And so I really made a decision proactively to stay home with her, and best decision ever. But my mind was a little bit bored. Sometimes when she was asleep, my husband was working. So I'd written for years and years for fun. I'd always delayed pursuing publication on a really practical level. I turned down opportunities. I just was very focused. I felt like my husband's career was very busy and one of us needed to be home, and I was happy to be that person. But the time came where I got my agent, and then we submitted to publishers, and it was very fortuitous and divine, I think, that I picked up my daughters from school in September of 2018, and I picked them up and we're driving home, and I'm processing how I'd reached a point in my life where all 4 of my girls were in school all day. It was the very first day they'd all been in school all day. And before I got home, my agent called me with the offer from Bloomsbury.
That is incredible. I mean, let me just put that into terms for people who are listening, because you don't just wake up one day and you go, I'm going to get an agent. And then you just send an email and they go, hey, we want you. Like, it goes into the slush pile. It goes into that they're never going to look at that pile. Right. And that's for an assistant. So for you to be able to get that to an agent and then for them to reach out to you on this debut novel is Amazing. So did you anticipate that at all?
I knew because we'd been on a trip and I knew that Bloomsbury was interested, but I didn't know what the offer would be or if they would formally extend an offer. My agent had been keeping me updated, but mostly I'm with an agent, you're kind of outside the process. The agent kind of takes over the introductions to the publishers. And so I knew they were interested, but I had no idea that it was going to become official. I know they're often interested and things move differently. So he called me with the formal offer that afternoon, and I pulled into my driveway and I just thought, I think I needed something big to tell me that it was okay to move forward into this next phase of life. My girls were in school all day. I could commit. My biggest hesitation was just committing to a workload that I couldn't execute on well because my husband was very busy. He wasn't around. I was doing 99% of the childcare and everything from holidays to birthdays to bedtimes to mornings. I did all of it. And I was happy to do it, but I knew that I couldn't step away until they were in school at least. And so the fact that it happened that day was just always, it was just divine for me because I felt like I needed that moment. And it just was a very pivotal firework moment. So
I love that. And I feel like Sister Nelson talks about, you'll know that you feel the spirit when you can remember the moment and where you were. And I hear what you're saying when it's that moment that is like a snapshot. And it, like you said, I love that you share, it gave you that assurance because what was coming, you would probably need to go back to that assurance that this was the right path.
And so I did. You're exactly right. So I got this, and then I was very busy the next few months, and I felt like everything was right. This was like going to be a great phase of life. And I was writing books, and I was working on you have to do some editing after you sign with the publisher before it goes to print, et cetera. So I was working on those deadlines, trying to hit those deadlines, working with my editor and my team at Bloomsbury, who's brilliant and fantastic. And it was such a great period of life. But a few months later, February 2019, so just 5 months later, I came home one morning and my husband said, I don't feel very good. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, my head hurts. Oh, excuse me. This was actually via phone call. And I said, well, you probably haven't slept in like a week. Why don't you go home and sleep? And he's like, yeah, I just don't feel good. So I go home and I get there and I immediately know something's wrong. He's on my side of the bed in his underwear. He's showered and he's eating cereal from a mixing bowl. And I was just like, oh, something's wrong. So I called his colleague and one of his closest friends. And I said, it's Tiffany, something's wrong with Brandon here, listen. And his colleague is the current director of the ICU at our local hospital, which is Brandon's former position. And at that time, Brandon was a regional medical director for all the ICUs for HCA in the Southwest. So he was really busy overseeing hospitals. And by some miracle, he was not on a plane when this happened. He was usually on a plane those Monday mornings, he's usually on a plane to California. So I called his colleague and friend. He said, what's up, man? And Brandon said, I know you, but I don't know your name. And I can see you, but I can't say your name. And the guy says, Tiffany? And he's like, get him dressed. I'll be right there. And I'm like, what do you mean you'll be right there? He's like, I'm running out of Costco. Get him dressed. And my instinct was, running out of Costco? Who runs out of Costco leaving groceries? Like something catastrophic has just happened and I don't know what it is. And so I just kind of got Brandon dressed. And my instinct all along was just call Jared. I just call Jared and I get Brandon dressed, and these guys are both pretty big, muscular guys. And so we pull out, we go to the driveway and Jared pulls up, and he pulled up in about 7 minutes, and our Costco is a solid 15-minute drive. And at that point, I knew this was even a bigger deal because ICU doctors don't overreact. They see everything. Nothing with them. They're calm in every situation. And the fact that he was moving that quickly and being that directive with me, I knew that this was serious. And so he pulls up, and I kind of push Brandon into the car because at that point he's pretty incoherent. He just keeps saying, I don't feel good. And he keeps repeating himself. So I kind of push Brandon in the car. And at that point, Jared just turns to me and says, okay, follow us into the ER. I've already called in the stroke team. And I'm like, oh
my gosh.
Stroke. This is what's happening. And so the funny thing was, I never felt like I had to know what it was. I just had to follow my instinct, and my impression was to call this friend who would stay with Brandon for the next 7 days, pretty much not leaving his side nor mine until the brain surgery. So I feel like sometimes you don't have to know what to do. You just have to know what
the next right step.
You have to know the next step. And my next step was to call this man who would take over from there. So I followed Brandon to the ER, and luckily it's about a mile from our house. So I remember too, I had just gone to the grocery store and I had all these groceries in the back of my car. So I'm in my garage and I dumped the groceries onto my garage floor because my thought is I might be gone a long time. I'm so dumb. I don't even know what's going on. He had a stroke and I don't even know what a stroke is. I just know that there's a name called a stroke and it's usually bad.
Right.
So I call my twin sister, my identical twin sister. And I say, hey, I think Brandon's had a stroke. I'm going to the ER. I'm not really sure what's going on, but I have all these groceries on my floor. We need to make sure we we just make sure they make him into the house? Like, I'm worried I'm going to come home to like rotten chicken or something. I don't know.
That is such a mom moment. It is such a mom thing.
She wisely just says, okay, and hangs up. And of course, by the time I get to the ER, she's about 2 minutes behind me. And at that moment, I felt like as we're walking in, I felt like everything is about to change. And as I pulled into the ER and I see everything is just a zoo at this point, because he was the former director of the hospital, the ICU. Everyone knew him. He'd actually been there that morning about 2 hours previously, meeting with a man who owns the hospital from Tennessee. So it was just pretty surreal for everyone there, myself included. All of his colleagues were there. People just can't believe it's happening. So it's pretty crowded. I'm trying to make my way through, and I had thought kind of walking in, everything's about to change. And as I'm walking through, everything is kind of changing. And I look over, and by the time I get there, they have the scan back, and I look over at the colleague and I see his face just teary. And I said, it's not good. And I just mouthed the words, and he just says, no. And I thought everything has changed. That subsequent series of events, everything's about to change. Everything is changing. And suddenly everything had changed. And I knew in that moment, things were going to be okay. I just had this strong impression that I knew how serious it was. I could see the blood clot on the screen. It was a hemorrhagic stroke. So it's a giant blood clot in his brain first. And at that point, I feel like we just had miracles. And we did have miracles, but I felt like he was going to pass, and it would be really hard and things would be okay, or he would live and it would also be really hard and things would be okay. And that's like the formula impression I had over the next few days. It was just, things are going to be okay no matter what way they turn out. And I can't predict that. And I have no control. And so at that moment in time, things did change. I obviously completely put everything up with my book and my professional life on hold. And for the next about 2 years almost, but it was the right decision. So we started that day with transferring him to the University of Utah neuro ICU. And we thought he needed this emergency brain surgery. And by the time he got there, he'd had a blessing and the bleeding had stopped, which was an unexpected miracle. It saved his life. And then a few days later, he had a brain operation. And then after that, he continued to have a lot of complications, but overall recovered slowly and efficiently, had to learn how to read and write and talk and communicate. Could no longer take care of patients, which was really, really hard for him. He worked his life to be an ICU doctor and care for those in need. And suddenly he was the one in need, which is humbling and hard.
Yes.
And then he had seizures for about a year, and now it's been almost 3 years and he's doing fantastic. So the story has a happy ending, but I choose to see the miracles along the way, and I'm grateful for each one.
Incredible. And I love the breadcrumbs along the way of that faith that you would probably go back and rely on, of, like you said, I love this sort of driving theme of the next step, just being shown the next step and being accepting of just knowing the next step. And it's all worked out okay. It doesn't mean it's ideal. It doesn't mean it's beautiful in every moment, but it means it's all okay. I love that. And with that faith, when you go back and look at that, how did Bloomsbury react? How did you feel? I mean, obviously you're putting your focus and everything on your family again. I mean, not that you weren't not focused on, I know what you're talking about, where it's a mom and, right? And most of the time it's focus on mom and it's a little bit of and then sometimes you have to focus on the and. Were you able to smoothly pull out of that and then come back into it? What is it that helped that transition of being able to let go of it smoothly and then knowing when it was time to come back in?
That's a good question. So my agent and I called him first that day and said, this has happened. I don't really know how available I'm going to be for the next few weeks. So just, and I think by some twist of fate, there wasn't really anything there was no deadline imminent. There was nothing they needed from me for the next few weeks. So I actually didn't even communicate to the Bloomsbury team, I think, for weeks afterward that this had happened, mostly because it just wasn't a priority. I knew that they were dealing with at this point I'd finished the material and they were dealing with, I always say with the publisher, a mainstream publisher, you own the words, but they own the book.
Right.
I'd finished the words and they were kind of putting the book together. And so I think it happened at a time for me where I could actually totally take a step back, and the things I needed to do, my agent could either do, or they weren't pressing. So overall, the women there were really supportive when I eventually communicated what had happened. I just didn't even think to tell them at the moment because nothing was pressing, and I know they would have supported me. But I was also very concerned that they know that I could still complete my tasks, and I'm committed to whatever I do. I've always been that way, and I don't like not fulfilling my obligations. So I wanted to make sure they knew that I was still going to complete it. So luckily I was able to, but the hard part was delaying the second book because I was in the middle of writing the second book, which follows this one. And I did select to put that on hold. Really for about 2 years, I stopped writing it completely after the stroke, mostly because writing requires a lot of creativity. And
yes,
what his experience was so mentally demanding in a way I'd never experienced before. When you're someone's full-time caregiver and they have so many risks, and with the seizures that were very scary, and he couldn't drive for a year. There was a lot going on, and a lot that I have 4 children who I'm trying to communicate and keep them mentally healthy and stable during this really chaotic time. That just kind of consumed a lot of my energy, my emotional energy. And for the first time in about 15 years, I felt like writing wasn't the right outlet. The right outlet was to sleep, if I could. Sleep was so rare, far more rare after the stroke than it had ever been with children. I mean, it just was, you have to listen for everything. You have to be, your senses are so heightened when you're recovering from those situations. So, and when you have a spouse recovering from those situations. So I intentionally decided that for me, it was better to take a break and not feel like I was not completing what I'd committed to personally, than to try to make it work every single day when just it wasn't the right time. And I believe in times and seasons. I think we all have those moments that work for us and those moments that don't.
And I love that point that you make, because I think it's such an important life skill and a spiritual gift to be able to identify when it is time to move and when it is time to be still and know that I am God kind of feel, right? And both of them, that yin yang of the way to move it forward. Sometimes it's in the being still that is the hard part, even because you probably feel that
tasks you like to check off. It's natural.
It's like, and I want to do this and I know that I can, but this is taking my time, and that's exactly where you want to be. I love this. Let's talk about this for just a second. So I love that you were able to identify that and be able to make those clear decisions. I just hear such a beautiful clarity from you of, I know this is what I'm going to do and I'm going to accept it. And I'm sure there were moments that were hard and things like that. So I'm not negating that, but being clear with yourself and with the Lord of just, okay, I'm accepting it. And then I'm moving on and trusting there will be the divine law of compensation that will make it up. And it seems like that's exactly what happened. Is that what kind of came to pass?
Well, I love your words. I'm going to remember that divine law of compensation. Yeah, essentially, it's exactly right. When I discuss creative writing and do classes on creative writing, I love this quote by Henry Miller, who says, "When you can't create, you can work." And as a writer, that's really powerful, because sometimes you're kind of stuck with creating, and there's so much more that goes into writing. And so though I couldn't create because I wasn't free with my mind to really go those places where I can isolate myself from the world around me in order to build these characters and these stories, there's a lot I could do. And so I focused on the things I could do. One thing I could do was read. I could read because it was an escape. And reading's been an escape my entire life. Fiction, I read dumb fiction, good fiction, doesn't matter. I don't care. Nonfiction, I read everything. I shouldn't say dumb. I should say fiction people consider dumb. But I read it all. And so reading, I really embraced reading again. I never stopped reading, but I was able to prioritize that. Whereas previously I would have spent that valuable hour before bed writing. My mind needed to calm down. And so I embraced that hour before bed reading. So that was really something I did. I continued to read, research, but most importantly, I just told myself that there wasn't the time to write and create. And that enabled me to feel confident in that process. And alongside that, I continued to kind of just follow my own instincts. So I do feel like you said, that divine law of compensation, which I love. I was speaking to a group of 7th graders, 8th graders, whatever, at the school. And the teacher came up to me afterward, and she was one of the teachers. And she said, "I love that. I'm a young mom and I always want to write, and I write all the time, but it's just so hard right now. How do you do this?" Her question, the way she phrased it, caught me off guard. I'm not even quite sure how she did, but what I understood for myself is I can now go to schools and visit. I can do things that are outside my home, and I'm free because my girls are in school. So I'm free to make those commitments. Whereas 10 years ago, it was really hard to make physical commitments. I physically was stuck in my house taking care of children, but I was mentally free. I had the freedom to create. Now things have flip-flopped, and I'm physically more free during the day. I don't have babies. I don't have toddlers. My youngest is 7, which kind of changes everything, as you know. But I'm mentally more absorbed with the growing needs of my growing children. And so I think we have seasons where maybe our physical needs are easier to meet and our mental needs are harder, and vice versa. And I think just constantly being in tune with yourself and adapting. One of the ways I adapted after the stroke, though I couldn't write, when I needed to create, I always say I'm like the weird lady in the car, because I tend to just tell myself stories as I'm driving.
Yeah, then you do voice notes. Yeah.
And I dialogue while I'm driving. And I realized that was my alone time, and I didn't have any other alone time. I mean, COVID happened the year after. And so without alone time to create, without isolation and quiet, I had to adapt. And I think sometimes we just have to have more confidence in our own abilities to know what works for us and just keep trying new things until it works.
I love that. Oh my gosh. And that brings back memories. I have voice notes that I'll go back and type that because I just put them in there and I hear myself going through the Wendy's drive-through to get my son his burger. And yeah, it's hilarious.
I had never done that before. Why hadn't I done that for years? I don't know.
It's so perfect though. And I love that you bring up this working with your rhythm and not looking at the other side of the fence and saying, oh, but I want to be there. Being able to value the place that you're in and knowing that God can help you work with it. He will help you, like you said, work or create and whatever phase that you're in, and it'll be used. I remember years ago doing that same thing, reading. And then KSL asked me to do a radio show and it was a 3-hour show and I had a baby and I was like, I don't even know how to, I would do it on sticky notes. And guess what? All those 10 years of reading, I was able to pull thoughts and the Spirit helped me to remember things and brought it. So it was all used. So I love the point that you make. And it's so reassuring to our listeners. You're not missing out. Every stage has its benefit. Every stage has, like you said, its freedom. And if we'll work with it, align ourselves with it, we'll be able to plumb the depths of that and get the good stuff from it. You do the school visits and podcasts and author events and things like that. And I know you've gotten a little bit of flack for your main character being a little bit unbelievable. And you have kind of a feel about that, like something to say about it. So what's been the response and what's been your response to that?
Great question. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, I think so. This character, I'll just describe her briefly. She's lived all over the world. This book starts out with her arriving in America for the first time with her parents who are diplomats. And she's told that dangerous past she left behind is over and she's now safe. And that's kind of the premise of, is she safe or isn't she? Dun, dun, dun. Because it's a spy thriller romance mashup. So there's a lot going on. This character can do a lot of stunts and tricks and she can speak all these languages. And her parents have trained her. They've lived all over the world doing these in these dangerous circumstances in these hot spots, these war zones. They've been, attacked before. And so she's learned, as her parents are diplomats, she's learned how to survive. And her parents have intentionally trained her. It's obviously a hyper reality. It's like a James Bond movie with a teenage female protagonist or like a Mission Impossible movie. And so people would say, some reviewers are like, wait, but that's unbelievable that a teenage girl could front this show, could be this action star and also have complex female hormones and female emotions. And I think when men write female spy thrillers, there's a lot of female-driven spy thrillers, but they're almost all exclusively penned by men. They focus on a different part of the female orientation. And I focus on what makes us uniquely female is what her skill set's rooted in. And so mostly, yes, she has these stunts and tricks that are very unbelievable because it's a hyper reality. But I personally feel like this hyper reality mirrors our reality and the really incredibly unbelievable things the girls are doing that I associate with. And she exemplifies that in a hyper reality and in its extreme stage, but really she's just a normal teenage girl with a complicated life that is committed and loyal. Maybe I'll read this to answer your question. I did feel a little bit like I was writing this to one person in particular. And I think the reason is I feel defensive of teenage girls. I think they're so often criticized for not being capable of these things, or when they are, it's with ulterior motives. And I just think teenage boys and girls have it kind of rough in some regard. But I think what makes them have that perception is actually what makes them powerful. And the way teenagers view the world is a way we only get to view the world once. It's this primitive, raw experience that you cannot recreate ever. And so I really encourage teenagers to embrace that outlook, embrace that unique perspective that happens when your emotions are just at the surface and you don't have a solid filter. You just perceive. It's just very primitive is the best word I can use.
Yes.
So maybe I'll just read this real quick. I disagree with the general consensus that teenage girls are ditzy, crazy, annoying, obnoxious, needy, dumb, melodramatic, or manipulative. Sure, their actions might occasionally be explained this way, but these are not their characteristics. The teenage girls I know are bold, intelligent, hardworking, empathetic, driven, athletic, courteous, creative, loyal, and disciplined. There is something beautiful and raw about a teenage girl's experience and visceral emotions. Our feminine passion is a gift, not a curse. It enables us to become brave women. I'm often asked, what do you hope readers feel when they finish reading your book? Simply, I hope readers see in Sophia the best in themselves, their own resilience, compassion, and self-worth. I hope they feel empowered to magnify their skills and talents, not shirk them. And I do really feel strongly that we have to embrace our different characteristics and unique qualities. And yeah, she has gotten flack because the words people use to describe her, they do not use with comparable titles with boy protagonists. And so it's not, I don't think it's ever intentional, but I think subconsciously we don't think a girl can be this. And I always say, if this is unbelievable, are you telling me that Tom Cruise chasing after a moving airplane and running and leaping inside of it as it's taking off is believable? No. It's
Well,
inspiring. Of course, it's not believable, but
exactly.
she is, because she represents real girls doing hard things.
And I think I love this point because I think that flywheel is starting to shift. You see Gal Gadot, she was up to 5 months pregnant filming Wonder Woman, right? And she was in the Israeli army and she's teaching these soldiers physical fitness. And you see that this idea of sit still and look pretty is being shifted. And women, these young girls are actively shedding this cocoon that has been sort of put on them and saying, no, I have thoughts, I have feelings, I have personality, and I'm imperfect and I'm okay with that, and helping them to embrace that they have unlimited potential. And especially in the land of America, where they, a lot of these women that are reading or live, they have so much opportunity, and it is up to them to make that bold step. So I love that even in this YA, I'm seeing this upswell of YA and fiction being able to empower, like you said, these girls, and the resilience. I love that word. I love the way that you're helping them to embrace that. Do you see that when you do visits? Do the girls seem to embrace that, or do they enjoy that?
Yeah, I mean, I think they all love the character. I mean, she's so fun. She can do all these cool things. She can do so many fun things. And that's like, sorry, I've got noise going on. So many fun things. And that's really empowering. I think we can all do that. I always say I based some of her characteristics, I based off one of my best friends when we went skiing together. She was like, and she was like this gorgeous girl, and she could just do everything and every trick. And you just didn't expect that, but she did. And I think something important for me is we don't have to reject our femininity in order to be powerful. I think we have to, like this character and the women in this series, they embrace what makes them uniquely feminine. They embrace their beauty and their intelligence and their compassion. And that's not a negative. That's what makes them uniquely trained and skilled to perform their duties. And so I really embrace what makes us uniquely feminine. And I don't think we have to emasculate men to make women succeed. I don't think it's a mutually exclusive game. I think women can continue to feel empowered to embrace what makes them uniquely feminine. And by so doing, really enable us to succeed and reach our potential.
I love that. And that helps the men fulfill their potential when we're fulfilling ours. And it's that woven together, beautiful, filled measure of our creation. And that's so great that you brought that up, because I wanted to ask you, as far as the ideas and where you came from, I know we're kind of wrapping up and coming down to the end of our time, but I wanted to ask you, how you felt this calling to, it feels to me like a calling that you're talking about, this at addressing this idea of empowering these young girls, right? So did the idea come from initially like, I want to help girls be able to stand on their own, or from your own experience? Or did it come from, here's an idea, and then that feeling kind of wove itself through the story? Chicken or the egg? Like, what kind of came for you?
I think I can answer this, but I'm not quite sure. I might change my answer in a year. I don't really know. I feel like that happened very organically. I really had no intention of creating this character. I'd been simultaneously, you mentioned my great grandma Mary Astor, who's a movie star. She was fantastic. She won an Academy Award. She's a brilliant actress. She was incredibly successful and independent and hardworking, and yet she's continually, when she's brought up in the current media and the New York Times or by famous directors, and they talk about her, they focus on the scandals, her deviancy, they would call it. And the truth is, she was so much more than that. She stood up for herself against every major executive in Hollywood when they told her if they didn't give up her daughter, she would never work again. And she said she wouldn't give up her daughter, and then she won an Oscar. And that way of just standing up for herself has always inspired me. But I didn't know that story till much later. So I've been researching all this. And so I knew in my character, I wanted her to be real. I didn't want her. It's easy to write a female spy who is a robot, who has just these like killer instinct. And that's just not how women are. Women have emotions and sensitivities, and our instinct is her mother, who we'll read more about in the second book. She really talks about your feminine instinct and how that enables her to succeed in this world by reading and using her intuition. And I feel like the conversation about the way this affects young women has happened very organically, because what happened was I received these reviews and they were fantastic, except for this idea that you have to either suspend your disbelief because she's a girl, or it's not believable because she's a girl. And I found myself very sensitive to that, which is funny because I'm generally not self-conscious at all. My husband and my twin sister's husband always say when we're divided half, so is our emotion. So we're like very... it takes a lot to rile me up. I don't get sensitive. I'm not self-conscious, but this topic really caught me off guard and how affected I felt. And I felt like I felt attacked personally, not from this book, but from what I was as a teenager. I felt like defensive for my teenage self, that someone would look at a story fronted by a boy in a spy thriller genre, which is obviously not realistic, and just praise how it's so action-packed and oriented, and this boy can do all these skills. And essentially the same book with a girl, it's like, just make sure you suspend your disbelief because you know that's not real, right? And it's a totally different tone to the reviews. And I don't think it's intentional. I think it's just ingrained in our narrative that we don't see girls fronting these films. We don't see girls fronting action films when they're not some type of sci-fi character. We don't see them when they're actually still women. We want to make them more either abrasive, aggressive, or what do you call it? Not sci-fi, but like faux. They're not just human. They have something that makes them that way. And my girl's just a girl. And yet she can do these things because she's disciplined and hardworking. And so I found myself kind of being like, excuse me, no, I disagree with that. And that's what kind of sparked the conversation. So I began speaking to young women's groups all over. And I tend to share the message of becoming unbelievable. And the things that people see in this book, that she's so unbelievable because she can do all these things. I just firmly believe that it mirrors real life girls doing unbelievable things. And that's what I want to highlight. And I want to encourage girls to reach their divine potential by embracing their unbelievable characteristics and qualities.
I love that because they are unbelievable on the daily. In fact, I saw a post recently from a teacher who very quickly, he just gathered his students and he wanted to have a connecting activity. And he said, just write down on a piece of paper the things that you want to let go of that are just hard for you, and just piles of this crumpled up paper. And as he went around dealing with cancer and, neglect and drugs in the house and all of this stuff. And it was incredible. Kids in tears, the teacher in tears. And he said, I just did not look at them the same way again. Sorry.
Oh, I love
because
that.
They're dealing with so much. And I love that you see these teens for who they are and what they are bearing. And those hand cards that they're pulling, it's tender. The hand cards that they're pulling every single day. I just think this is such a great way for them to feel that, to read it in a fiction, but to see that she's a real girl and to feel the hope and see themselves in that. Tiffany, this is so fantastic. I wish we could just talk for another half an hour in pajamas and we could change the world. But meanwhile, people out there are going to want to invite you to come speak to their young women groups and to their author events and things like that. How can they get a hold of you in the best way?
Well, thank you. I would love to come speak to anyone. I have a website, tiffanyrosenhan.com. You can get my newsletter then, or you can email myself, hello@tiffanyrosenhan.com, or my publicist, jenmartinpublicity @gmail.com. And maybe we can link to that after.
Absolutely. We'll put it in the show notes. No worries.
Please be in touch, and I'm available. So I'm also on Instagram @Tiffany Rosenhan.
And she's got a book trailer on there too, so you can check that out. Yeah, absolutely love it. Fun, fabulous book. And this has been such a fun interview. And the takeaways that I have are so numerous, but I love this. Empower our teens, empower our teen self as women in that feminine way, and being able to do it in your season, whether it's writing, whether it's speaking, whatever it might be. Embrace your season and plumb the depths of it with him, partnering with him so that you can make the most of it. And then he can make those dividends happen in the future in the way that are going to be best for you. Absolutely love this. Tiffany, thanks so much for being with us today. Such a joy. And if you love this and you want more podcasts, go below, rate, review, and subscribe. You can check it out also at ldspma.org, and you can get all these beautiful things in a newsletter so that every time we have a podcast, you can get it right in your inbox. We love it. And we would love to hear more from you about your ability to navigate the intersection of faith, creativity, and professional skill.